Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into the personality of Joffrey Baratheon, but before we begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it. Joffrey was a cruel, arrogant, stupid, and sadistic man who became the King of Westeros. His remorseless and tyrannical rule gained him comparisons to be called another Mad King. Quite a feat given the depravity and madness of Aerys II Targaryen. Sadism and brutality were his chief weapons, and he smiled as he wielded them, indulging in the agony of his subjects and servants, for example, giving a man a choice between losing his hands or his tongue. Even the people who claimed to love were not free from his cruelty, as he delighted in the thoughts of serving Sansa Stark the head of her brother Robb at his wedding feast, having his knights beat her in front of the court to exert his authority, and much more. However, he was also incompetent, impulsive, petulant, and prone to rash outbursts of violence when angered, frightened, or slightly showing that he was a coward more than anything else. As Tyrion noted, the realms have been cursed with many a vicious and foolish king, but it was unique to be cursed with a vicious idiot in one body. Much like earlier Targaryen kings, it was suspected that Joffrey's sociopathic behavior was a result of his incestuous bloodline, though his sister and brother were of a kinder disposition. While sadism and cowardice came to define him, Joffrey was consumed by megalomaniacal delusions of grandeur, even though his actions proved that he was unskilled in politics, warfare, or wisdom. Narcissism and his delusional fantasies made him capable of realizing his own shortcomings, defaulting to his royal authority when challenged and seeing dissent as defiance, making far more problems than he solved. He was convinced that he deserved praise and utter devotion from everyone around him because of his purported royal blood, even though at the start of the War of the Five Kings, most of the realm rose in rebellion against him, to the point that his faction had control of two kingdoms, the Westerlands and the Crownlands, including a narrow strip of the southern riverlands between them. Despite this, minimal standing and limited power, Joffrey's pathological arrogance, coupled with his family's backing, made him believe that he was and would be the greatest king in the history of the Seven Kingdoms. Combined with his unstable personality, Joffrey possessed a massive sense of entitlement, as well as having no impulse control thanks to his mother Cersei. She spoiled and indulged Joffrey his entire life, almost never being able to refuse him and shielding him from consequences, inflating his already enormous ego. Cersei also outright told him that the world would be exactly what he wanted it to be, creating a kind of god-king complex within him. Moreover, his father figure, King Robert, was largely absent from his life and a terrible role model, with his constant drinking. Joffrey was deceitful, but showed even less tact than his mother, who had little to begin with. He was willing to take advantage of the trust that Sansa Stark initially placed in him, when she was blinded by fantasies of marrying her handsome prince. In general, however, Joffrey was too short-sighted and impatient to bother lying, often committing various atrocities in public without concern for the consequences, believing his authority as king gave him the right to do whatever he wished. Joffrey had precious little restraint emotionally, and would resort to petty, impractical, and childlike delights on violent degrees. For example, pouring wine over Tyrion's head, grinning at the brief duel between the Mountain and the Hound, or sneering while scarring Mycah. In his deluded and remorseless view of the world, he would cling to any sadistic urge that came to mind, and never considered the long-term repercussions of his actions, thinking himself clever when he was a fool, not unlike his mother. His execution of Ned Stark was more than likely an impulsive decision for his own sole and personal enjoyment, than for the latter's supposed treason, and was a disastrous move that plunged the Seven Kingdoms into a full-on war. Joffrey's view on his own family, immediate and alleged both, was influenced by his own impulsiveness and self-absorption, and it is clear that he did not truly hold his family in high regards. Despite her protectiveness of him, and constant support for his actions for most of his life, he was comfortable with being misogynistic and condescending toward his mother, Cersei, insinuating that her status as a woman, and mocking Robert Baratheon's disloyal to her. Joffrey taunted and belittled his true father, Jaime Lannister, as an unexceptional knight and for the loss of his hand. In addition, he apparently bullied and tormented Tommen and Myrcella their entire lives, never connecting with them in any way. For example, the Starks did, and even considering Tommen weak for crying like any normal person. Even his grandfather, Tywin Lannister, was a person he held in contempt, being arrogant enough to furiously accuse Tywin of being a coward during Robert's rebellion, in comparison to Robert Baratheon, who climactically killed Rhaegar Targaryen in combat and took the crown for himself. This scene is particularly interesting, because Joffrey is oblivious to himself doing the same thing. Tyrion and Tywin fought, bled, and prevailed against the insurgent Stannis Baratheon, while Joffrey hid behind the walls of the Red Keep without even killing a single invader. Based on all this, Robert was probably the only relative Joffrey held in any high regard, and Robert wasn't even Joffrey's father. The worst relationship that Joffrey had was with his uncle Tyrion, and on several occasions Tyrion stymied and accosted Joffrey for his sadistic, cruel, and arrogant actions, and Joffrey at several points went to petty means of mocking and berating him. This probably influenced Joffrey's urge to point at Tyrion mere moments before he died, as one final stab at his uncle for so much as standing in his way. The only person that seemed to be at all capable of controlling Joffrey was Tywin, who was able to intimidate Joffrey by mere presence. For example, on the occasion where Joffrey accused Tywin of cowardice, Tywin simply sent the boy to bed. Joffrey was obsessed with the self-conception that he was a great warrior like King Robert, but displayed no martial skill. Joffrey never raised a weapon against an enemy combatant in his entire life, excluding Tyrion's birthday present to him, despite bragging that he would cut down Robb Stark and Stannis Baratheon in battle himself, which he never came close to at any point in the war. Despite the fact that his faction was losing the war and bracing for a siege in King's Landing, Joffrey insisted that it was the time for him to strike against the Stark forces, as they were distracted by the capture of Winterfell. However, Tyrion pointed out that his own city was on the verge of attack by Stannis' superior forces. His delusions were so extensive that during breakfast prior to his wedding, Joffrey noted, after receiving the Valyrian steel sword Widow's Wail, that using it would be like cutting off Ned Stark's head all over again, implying that he was the one who beheaded Lord Eddard, even though he had simply ordered it, and Ilyn Payne was the one who actually did it. He also boasted before the Battle of the Blackwater that he would personally engage Stannis and kill him in combat, but never cross the ladder in combat throughout the entirety of the battle. Later on, to add stupidity to absurdity, he arrogantly claimed that he had saved King's Landing and personally broke Stannis Baratheon at the Battle of the Blackwater, when it was in fact entirely down to his uncle and grandfather's military efforts, whereas Joffrey turned cowardice and fled the battle, and Stannis himself was not entirely broken because he could still pose a threat to his opponents in the war, and his claims still stood to reason. His bloodlust was often overpowered by sheer cowardice. He rarely killed manually, nor did he initiate a fight where his opponent stood a decent chance of besting him. Because of this, he preferred tormenting animals and vulnerable people rather than fighting warriors, and regularly went on hunts because of this. Akin to Robert, but at least the latter was legitimately skilled at fighting men. Described as a vicious idiot by his uncle Tyrion, Joffrey was not simply a ruthless, cruel tyrant, but so incompetent it beggars belief. While Robert was also not skilled at ruling, though not as bad as Joffrey, he was at least respected as a great warrior. Joffrey, in contrast, had no redeeming value whatsoever. His only claim to rule was that he was the son of Robert, the previous king. The great irony, of course, was that Joffrey was actually Jaime's bastard son and had no valid claim to the throne. But a large number of Joffrey's followers continued to obey his crazed orders with near-blind devotion. After hearing the rumors of his true parentage, Joffrey, out of spite and petulance, ordered that all of Robert's bastards be killed to make sure no one would challenge his claim as heir. As one would expect, his rashness backfired, and served to heighten suspicions when the people saw the atrocity that Joffrey committed by destroying the evidence of the truth. His legitimacy along with it. This is one of several occasions where Joffrey overextends himself, the other being when he apparently sends Sir Mandon Moore to kill Tyrion during the Battle of the Blackwater, ignoring two factors. Tyrion was leading Joffrey's men against Stannis when Joffrey abandoned the battle. Also, the Kingsguard, at least by reputation, only ever served major members of the royal family, among whom Joffrey is supreme, and his hatred of Tyrion is far too well known. Thus, Joffrey's actions are never properly calculated, and he never anticipates repercussions from them. Joffrey possesses all of the classical traits of narcissism. As he possesses an outrageous temper, his delusion about his self-importance and superiority, and quick to torment and harm anyone who displeases him. He is known for his unstable mannerisms and effect when insulted, and has a very short fuse. He lacks remorse and empathy towards people, and has no ability or desire to expand it. He is entirely apathetic and even cold towards his brother Tommen when the latter cries over the departure of his sister Marcella. He even conceitedly claims that the prince shouldn't cry, despite the fact that he witnessed crying himself. When confronted with this fact, he brushed it aside when Sansa pointed out that her brother Rickon cried himself, to which Joffrey claimed it was irrelevant because Rickon Stark wasn't a prince and Joffrey was. But he did not stop to speculate that this didn't make the slightest scrap of difference. Once in a while, Joffrey does make a valid point, such as that the feudal levy system in the Seven Kingdoms is somewhat antiquated, or that his advisors should be worried about Daenerys Targaryen, reportedly hatching 3 new dragons in Essos, or that his grandfather Tywin Lannister bode his time before he finally aided the rebels during Robert's rebellion. Joffrey was capable of logic, but only if the situation was obvious, and even then he got it wrong most of the time. After being poisoned at his wedding feast, he incorrectly assumed that it was Tyrion. Presumably, he came to this conclusion due to his uncle's constant chiding, insulting, and threatening, as well as his use of physical punishment to discipline his wild, uncontrollable nephew, or the fact that he made cupbearer, and the only person who held the opportunity to poison his wine. This makes no sense, by the way. His hatred of his uncle may have also been a factor in this conclusion. Joffrey rarely made a valid insight, and often when used as a means for a narrative to underscore that everyone else is simply overlooking something. If someone as stupid as Joffrey realized this, it should have been obvious to everyone else. Even on those first 2 points, Joffrey was quite short-sighted. He was concerned about Daenerys in the Far East, despite the fact that Robb Stark was already leading major armies in rebellion in Westeros itself, and didn't consider that he should concentrate on the much more immediate threat, which is how Tyrion reacted to the news of Daenerys. Similarly, while he vaguely said that having a standing royal army was better than using feudal levies, Cersei had to explain to him that his suggestion for how to make one was too impractical to work. If a royal army conscripts men from the north, they still wouldn't feel enthusiastic about attacking their fellow Northmen. Joffrey may also have been correct when he said that the Stark forces were distracted after the capture of Winterfell. That would have been the perfect opportunity to strike, but once again Tyrion had to remind him that his own city was preparing for a siege by Stannis Baratheon. Despite his lack of technical abilities and shortcomings in battle or combat, he was surprisingly knowledgeable on crossbows, which he demonstrates to Margaery, knowing their makes and models, effectiveness, and was able to use them quite well, being able to shoot a bolt through the eye of a well-mounted stuffed boar's head several meters away. His only direct kill with one, however, was Ross, a prostitute woman who he restrained, and it was shown that he missed his shot multiple times, due to the scattered arrows across the room, though these may have been for torturing her with the threat of death, by missing intentionally, which would not be outside the realm of possibility for someone like Joffrey. Despite all of these negative traits, however, Joffrey is shown to be capable of feeling very limited emotion. On Robert's deathbed, he is visibly shocked and saddened that his legal father may be dying and holding his hand, and in the books it is stated by various characters that Joffrey is very fond of Sandor Clegane, despite his outwardly aloof manner towards him. He was probably more fond of the Hound because the man was a prolific and savage warrior, and had no complaints or restraints about killing, disregarding the fact that the Hound hated his even more savage brother, who was probably more aggressive and impractically violent than Joffrey himself, making him more interested in the Hound's combat prowess and aloofness, and Joffrey probably would have been terrified of the Mountain. He treated Margaery Tyrell much better than he did with Sansa Stark during their betrothal, although this is due to Margaery manipulating him by pretending to be intrigued by his playful sadism. On the other hand, he also acted charming and kind to Sansa initially before turning her into his plaything to abuse, and this one act was because his mother demanded him to do so. But he only became this way after their father confessed treason, and her brother raised his armies against his claim. A major point in the story is that Joffrey has absolutely no redeeming qualities, other than that he is rather handsome, according to some. He is not simply cruel, but an imbecile, and so incompetent that he can only be regarded as dangerous, even when dealing with his power base in House Lannister. From a standpoint of ruthless impracticality, Joffrey was an insane idiot who does more harm to House Lannister than good. Even so, people in the narrative who haven't met Joffrey, or only seen him in public events at King's Landing, have difficulty accepting that he is a cruel lunatic. This goes against the simplistic worldview that has been impressed on them by their own popular culture of romance songs and poetry. Sansa in particular became obsessed with Joffrey after encountering him, simply because he was very handsome, even though she knew absolutely nothing about his personality. Even into the first months of Joffrey's reign as king, many commoners assumed that the good King Joffrey will soon restore peace and order and put an end to the war. At first, some can't really grasp that Joffrey himself started the war with a flippant outburst which killed Eddard Stark, and thus assumed Eddard may have deserved it, given that no sane ruler would randomly execute a major lord without justification. Only gradually and grudgingly do people start to suspect that Joffrey might not be a fit king, but even then they try to rationalize this disconnect between Joffrey's beautiful appearance and horrible personality by latching onto the belief that assuredly Joffrey's uncle, the demon monkey dwarf Tyrion, must be leading the boy astray with bad counsel. Only after Joffrey had several meltdowns in open court and brazenly commits several atrocities in full view of the public, like needlessly starting the riots in King's Landing by antagonizing starving refugees, do people start to accept that someone like Joffrey could truly be so evil. So what did you guys think of the personality of Joffrey Baratheon? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member or sending a super thanks if you wish to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.